Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are coming in over YouTube, you'll see a little link. You can click on that. It'll take you to Zoom. You see a little link. You can click on that. Then you end up in Mukana, and you can ask questions. You can chat with each other. You can talk, and figure out what we're doing here. If you have specific questions, media questions or virtual production questions, of course, you can ask those at any point in time as we open this up. So if you get here early, you can actually put the questions in early, and then we know what we're going to be talking about. There is a tag that usually is there for the specific subject matter. We're starting to customize that today as compression. So we're basically talking about compression today, pre-event production tomorrow, getting started with AWS on Friday. Saturday is education, Resolve, and building Raspberry Pis. So it's a very busy Saturday for all of you. And then, of course, Sunday is just kind of the hangout day. So those are the second hours. And so you just always want to make sure to tag those. First hour, of course, is opened season. If you're listening to all of this and you think, I have something to add, I could answer some of those questions, then we'd love to have you join the panel with us and actually be part of the conversation. All you have to do is be here early, 6:40 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. You can come in early, and what I really suggest is if you're not sure of your kit, is to come in earlier. So we open the doors at 6. Come in at 6:15, and just raise your hand, and we'll work on your kit with you before we actually go live. So that's the best time to do that. If it's the first time you've come to the session, the best time to do that is to come before 6:30, so that we can kind of see how things are going before we get to mic checks. Mic checks are kind of generally for us to just kind of figure out what the final bits are. The one thing to note is that we have added a couple things for Resolve. So there is, in the email that went out this morning, you'll see a link to another Mukana, a blank Mukana. That's a Resolve Mukana. So you save that link. You can ask those questions anytime you want. So as you're going through some of the training and you're thinking about it, we're playing with this idea of creating its own a room for a specific subject. So this is the first test of that. So if you have Resolve questions before Saturday, you can just put them in there. The advantage of doing that is it gives Steve and Mark more time to think about them. So it's really worth jumping in and trying that. And if it doesn't work, let us know. It's the first time we've ever done it. So, all right, Bill, take it away.
Thank you, Alex. Our first question comes in from Rotem Kish in Mazkert. It looks like Batya, which I looked up and is not too far from Tel Aviv, Israel. And he or she says, I have a Memorial Day event in Israel that I broadcast live on YouTube or Facebook. All speeches are pre-written and I need to put subtitles in real time on the broadcast. The event will be over an hour and a half. I will be with an ATEM Mini Extreme. What's the opinions on the best way to do that?
The most straightforward way to do it is just using the built-in still store that exists in the ATEM Mini. I believe it's 32. Is that correct? I don't have it right in front of me, but I believe you can store up to 32 at a time, and then you can store those images in the switcher. Now, there's a couple things to think about. You just load them all in. If you have Photoshop, you can load them directly in from Photoshop. If you otherwise, you need to save them out. You can save them out as almost anything and LumaKey them. If you want to save them out with an alpha channel, you need to save it out as a TGA or a ping. Note that the TGA pre-multiplied over black will oftentimes key a little better if you have soft edges or transparencies, but the ping will work just fine otherwise. And so the easiest way to do it is just to load them all in. Now, if you think you're going to have to, you can always keep on dragging them in over top of each other. So once you've used them, you can, if you have more than 32, you can definitely do that as well. But that's the most straightforward way to do it with the ATEM. Of course, if you want it animated, there's a lot of other tools you might. We started with just Keynote, Apple Keynote with LumaKey going out into one of the inputs, which will work. But there's tools like QLab, MIDI, other tools that you can use that are designed for it, designed to put those what we call a key fill out. So those are some of the things to think about if you're doing it. And since no one else is raising their hand, I'm going to quit riffing and keep going. Next question.
Jonathan J. in New Jersey is up next. Looking for some clarification on getting HD out of Zoom. Currently, all join a single meeting and push them to breakouts. Production machine in each one to ingest their ISO AV. If I attach my Zoom room to that meeting, does it bump everyone to 720 or 1080? And can't use a Zoom room outside my domain for security is another issue there.
I think that any Zoom room will upgrade. I don't know whether it upgrades the breakout rooms or not. Like, I don't know if that it doesn't. Nikki says no, the breaker. You have to have the Zoom room in the room to bump it up. Would you, with that whole 20-second rule or 30-second rule, could you just go through each room with the Zoom room and have it upgrade? I don't. That's the part I'm not. Like, just a little Zoom room wandering through. Go ahead, Mickey, and then Jeffrey.
That I haven't tried yet, but I think I remember hearing this in one of the Zoom test kitchens, that the breakout rooms don't get automatically bumped up.
All right, go ahead, Jeffrey, and then Chris.
Yeah, all I know is that when I got my Zoom room, I had to do this do the support thing and get it just to get 720. So that might be your best option, right?
Go ahead, Chris.
Alex, I've heard you say in the past that you weren't 100% certain that you were actually getting a real 1080 out of your point-to-point Zoom rooms. Do you think it has, did you ever research that deeper?
We actually do think that we are now getting, we're getting 1080p. I think we didn't earlier. It looks soft for 1080, but and it's hard to tell because you're set to 1080, you're sending 1080, but you're actually getting, whatever the other side is sending you. And so, and there's a lot to it. I've noticed that joining, I'm slowly moving Twit to Zoom. so I'm having them join my account because I have 1080. But what I notice is there's something going on there where we're seeing, resolution changes and so on and so forth that are so I'm not sure exactly what the thresholds are. We're still trying to test that. Go ahead, Chris.
And
whoop, you're muted.
Double punched. Do we know, can you get a 1080 Zoom room without a business account? If you just have a standard $15 a month account and a Zoom room, can you get 1080 out of that? Do we know for certain?
You don't know for certain. I don't know for certain.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that I will say, because we still have a Zoom. We have the business account with like 10 meetings or whatever that's there, and I think that's connected to that service. Go ahead, Peter.
So when Guy and I tried it about a month and a half ago using my Alexa 8 show, it bumped the meeting to 7. It bumped the meeting to 1080p. Speaking of Alexa.
Yeah, it did bump it to
which was interesting because
it'd be an interesting test to go from have a room sit in each breakout room for a little bit of period of time and see if that improves the breakout rooms.
Well, Alexas are cheaper than.
But I'm saying you could have one. You could. I'm just saying have it move through a bunch of rooms, not one in each room, but just have it sit there for 30 seconds and move to the next one. Could be.
I'm willing to try it if somebody wants to set it up.
Yeah.
I'd love to see a flow chart on exactly how all of this stuff works, but I'm afraid that once you make it, it would change.
It'd be different. I know.
Three-dimensional grid.
We used to have that problem with Hangouts, is that we would build these things of how to do something in a Hangout, and it would change on Thursday. Every Thursday it would be like, oh, there's a whole bunch of, there's new buttons and there's new things. And now we don't know what we're doing. So next question.
So we're slipping out of New Jersey across the bridge into the Bronx, New York, where Jeffrey Reyes says, is connecting an Apple TV into an ATEM Mini and airplaying content to it from an iPad equivalent to just connecting the iPad to the ATEM directly? Are there any delays or other issues worth noting?
There are some delays. It's a couple frames. But it's definitely very convenient. So that's something that most of our kits have is a Apple TV. Like when we're doing these presentations, even in studios, it's great to have an Apple TV under the desk plugged into a switcher. That just means that anybody can open up their mobile device and share to it, and it's a super easy way to wirelessly connect an iOS device to the switcher. Yeah, it totally works. But you will get a couple frames. I wouldn't use it as a camera where you have to have lip sync, but outside of that, it doesn't matter. Next question.
JJ McKenna here on the panel from Santa Venetia, California. When tracking your time for billing a client, which ticketing system do you use and why?
I don't track hours, so I don't know. It's not how I operate. I mean, usually it's a bid, of how much I said it was going to be, and then we track days. I don't track hours. Chris does. Chris tracks hours.
Yeah, we track. I've mentioned this before in the past. And we use an app called Harvest. It is a subscription. It's not an insignificant cost, but the level of granularity it gives you, you have to sign up each user or each person that's going to be part of something. You can create categories. So like we have one rate that we charge for editing, one for, scripting or whatever. And then you can break things down and see what one person did for the week, or how many hours cumulative were spent editing a project. The other thing that's really nice is when you forget to turn it off at the end of the day, at around 11 o'clock, it sends you an email. It goes, "Hey, did you leave your harvest on?" You go, "Oh, yeah." And you can go back and append it or change it.
I love it. It's unlock the potential of time. Harvest. Anyway, Peter.
Believe it or not, there's a QuickBooks app for timesheets that you can put on your phone. And that seems to be somewhat ubiquitous. So
There you go. Next question.
Charbax, who I think is Nicholas Charbonnier here in the panel, and I hope I'm doing your name justice, asks, when is it best to use StreamYard, Melonapp, or Restream rather than self-hosting on OBS or Ecamm?
I don't know what Melonapp is. Nicholas, can you tell us what? That's a new one for us.
I'm a huge fan of Melonapp. It's owned by Logitech. So the guys at Logitech, because StreamYard just got acquired for $200 million from this online platform, virtual events, Hop-In.
Yep.
And they just got a valuation of like billions. And Melonapp is kind of like they're copying a little bit, I guess, but it's way cheaper than StreamYard. I think it's better. You get 1080p, and it's like a whole hosted. It's nice to do these shows, like what's called interview shows. So I've done a few on my YouTube channel with that.
And you like it? It's easy to use?
Yeah, I like it. I mean, it's a little bit buggy. Like I interviewed one guy just a couple of days ago, and for 14 minutes, he was a few seconds out of sync. So that was a little bit sad. But otherwise, I mean, it's just bugs once in a while because they're like totally working like crazy trying to make it work. And I think it's great. And StreamYard is like huge. Like I've seen so many YouTubers use StreamYard, and I'm so impressed with that it just came out at the right time for the Corona, right?
Well, it's been out for a while. Like StreamYard isn't. StreamYard just got popular during Corona, but they've definitely been around for years. Slowly coming up to speed, so they've definitely earned their ranking. In that area is that they're a mature app. The ability to do that again as the round tables, graphics, distribute to multiple locations. I think Restream is probably better at distributing to lots and lots of different locations, but probably isn't as evolved as StreamYard or probably even Melon as far as building a studio that does all those things. But someone may disagree with me here. Jeffrey and then John.
Yeah, with Restream, the one big feature with Restream is you can go 24/7. Whereas StreamYard, you do have some sort of caps on there. And then of course you have the ability to use something like OBS to send to YouTube, Facebook, and all that. But they also have the in-stream switcher, so you can go web-based and do shows from there, and even bring in OBS into that to send out to different networks.
Go ahead, John.
So Leland and Ross Brand, whose Stream Universe has been on StreamYard since the very, very beginning, that they know those guys over there. And what I see on StreamYard is people start on StreamYard and then they paint themselves into a corner, and it won't do some of the advanced stuff that we do here. But it's a great place to get started, and it's great for bringing in hosts and having shows, and then you seem to graduate out of StreamYard into the next level.
Yeah, that's always the challenge. Is I think that a lot of times for people like me, we build a lot of custom architectures of how we're going to manage things and how we're going to bring people in. And so if you're not as advanced and you want to get started quickly, a lot of these get started quickly. It's just that it's hard to, you'll get to a point where you want to build a show that's more complex than what the platforms are capable of, because they're built to be easy. They're built to be, straightforward. And I think that they're a very valid place to start. But most of us run into some wall at some point and then start building custom solutions, either in the cloud or in hardware. Next question.
And our next highest rated question comes from James in Dublin, Ireland. Says the Logitech Brio is a 4K webcam. However, I've not been able to find how to access the 4K option. The highest setting I see available is 1080p. Any tips?
While it's a 4K sensor, I don't think that it actually outputs 4K ever that I know of. I've never seen the Brio put out for a 4K image. It's a 4K sensor, and what it allows you to do is pan and scan inside of that sensor. So when you're all the way wide, you're at 1080. I mean, it just converts that 4K down to 1080, but you can zoom in up to 2x, inside of that frame and then move it around, right? So I think that I don't think that it's a at some point it'll get softer there, but I don't think that it is a I've never seen a Brio put out the actual 4K signal through the USB, and I think that might be a bandwidth issue too. And I have been looking at there's lots of little webcams on Amazon. I don't know, it showed up, of course. Amazon figured out that I like webcams, and so now I'm getting these little advertisements for Chinese webcams that are just like the raw board with the thing, and I was like, oh, I might have to try that. It looks interesting. Next question.
Jonas Dattel of Reutlingen, Germany says, for software used in production, which licensing model do you prefer? One-time payments, but pay for updates, or subscription-based? Or are there other models which are better suited?
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, my number one thing is I like owning my software. However, that said, the subscription model for me is broken into two different threads. If I'm licensing somebody else's intellectual property, I'm happy for a subscription model. That means I can pay as long as I want access to their content and stop when I want to. The only time I get into trouble is when the subscription model is for subscription to get gateway into my own intellectual property, which means that if I'm working on software as a service and I'm building things, if I don't pay, I can't get access to it. I'm dead set against that model.
I think that there's some people are getting wary of subscription models just because there's so many of them. So many people are paying so many monthly subscriptions that it gets to be, I think, a little overwhelming. Definitely for smaller items, I think I prefer to just buy them. It's the big ones that I go, oh, maybe it'd be nice to have a subscription. But for production software, there's not many places where I wish I had a subscription. Like it's usually like I just want to own the software. Go ahead, Roscoe, and then Peter.
Yeah, for government and education installations, a lot of times the secondary funding isn't there. So a subscription model isn't really effective because you have money
Right.
one year and then the next money you don't. What do you do?
Yeah, and that's a problem for corporate as well. That's why a lot of them don't like it. In some ways, they do like it because they can just budget it in. If they start ahead of time and on a corporate, they'll budget it in like a lease. Like that's just what they have there, and that makes sense from a mathematical perspective. But for a lot of them that get grants or specific opens, that becomes a real issue. Go ahead, Peter.
I was going to kind of further to what Roscoe was saying. Matter of fact, it's in many cases against procurement rules in government contracts. They cannot commit funds outside of their fiscal year. So
Right.
they either buy it or they don't.
Yep. Next question.
Comes to us from Paul Wallace here in the panel from Austin, Texas. For charbax, we did a series of video podcasts about the Chromecast on chromecastcast.com. What is the future of Chromecast and Chromecast devices? And Paul says to Nicholas, glad to see you after 8 years.
What do people think of the Chromecast? Who's using the Chromecast, I guess is the question. Is anyone in the panel? Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Sorry, I wasn't prepared. I was waiting for Nicholas, but yeah, I've got it's built into a bunch of stuff that I have around my house. TVs have a lot of TVs come with Chromecasts, and I've got several generations of Chromecast. And Nicholas and I did a series, like 4 or 5 podcasts. They were really lengthy video podcasts 8 years ago about the Chromecast when it was kind of emerging. And yeah, it's great. I mean, you can throw tabs. You can go into Chrome and throw tabs up on your TV. But I'd really like to hear from Nicholas.
What do you think? What do you think of it these days, Nicholas, after all these years?
So, the new Chromecast, you can have it. There's a USB way to connect a webcam directly, and you can put it on your TV. And then you could, the dream that I think should be like a little dongle that you could do 4K video conferencing on any 4K TV. That'd be awesome. If somebody just does that, like it shouldn't be hard, right? They should add this to a little dongle.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, JJ.
I was just going to say that it makes it really simple tossing things in different devices. So above my wife's, jogging station in the morning, I put a little monitor up there, 27-inch, and then plugged a Chromecast in and plugged her headphones into that. Bluetooth, and everything was able to sync really easily. So it makes it easy to make a small installation on a budget.
We use it for cart of all things. So your cart is when you have a English, subtitles essentially, but for a live event. And you put a monitor up there, and you can pop a little Chromecast on the back and put it into what's called stream text, and then the captioners are wherever they are in the world captioning it away, and it shows up on the monitor. And it's super easy just to kind of plug them all in, and you get them all set up. And so we use them as glue. I have to admit, I've never actually watched anything on them other than using them as some kind of like chrome glue that I need to put on a monitor, and it's super effective for that. But it's just I just don't have any experience with. I have them laying around everywhere. I just don't plug them into the actual TVs. Next question.
Coming from Charbax again. This time, anyone use Elgato Camlink 4K on an M1 Mac? It's running a bit buggy on his, he says.
I wouldn't be surprised that it would be running buggy on an M1 right now. It's still early. Yeah, go ahead, Nicholas.
So the only way I can use I'm using it right now, the Elgato Camlink 4K, is by running this Game Capture HD app on the Mac to kind of like make sure it stays connected or something. Because if I go directly into my StreamYard or Melonapp or something, it might just freeze after like 5 minutes. I guess maybe they need to optimize on the ARM CPU. They need to optimize some things there, especially the Chrome browser or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things about that is that it's a hardware that hardware is more difficult to update for new architectures. So it might take a little longer before their drivers are working. Next question.
James Babbitt of San Diego here says, in the video from the drone in the bowling alley, we all watched that at the end of the show yesterday, there is stereo sound. Is the sound added to the drone video, or is it recorded live, maybe with noise reduction for wind and motor noise?
Go ahead, Stuart.
It's added in the editing. The noise you get from the motors and the props just drowns out any microphone that a Cinewood can carry. And just to let everybody have a good watch, I'm going to put a link in Mukana for everyone, which is from Paul Nurkala, who is Nurk FPV. And that is behind the scenes of doing a very similar shoot showing where the producers are walking around, the timing for getting people moving through the set and even getting people coming in from outside, and even where he was hiding in the set to produce this advert. And it looks like Jeffrey's already got it up. It's lovely. If you have a look past this first machine on the left, or sorry, on the right, the X-Men machine, that was where Paul was sitting to fly this. This is brilliant. I love this. There we go. Yeah. And that's not even a small gap for Paul Nurkala.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
Drones.
So, he's one who I've mentioned before that, please, second hour guest.
Just get me his contact. We'll reach out to him. I'd love to have him come on. Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, just a question for Stuart. What was the drone model? Can you put that in Mukana, the model and make of the drone that did that? And how much skill, Stuart, did that take? How much pilot skill did that require?
Thousands of hours.
A lot. Yeah, that's practice. Paul Nurkala is one of the best drone racers on the planet. So he's shooting gates at high speed like you wouldn't believe. And some of his race vision is amazing.
It's never the piano.
And the links for the drones are links for the drones are in the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
One of the things that's going to be interesting is for some of the stuff that I think is coming is in a lot of these areas you can tie down using either motion capture or a variety of different ultra wideband to get to a point with multiple points, to get to a point where the drone knows where it is in that scene. And when that happens, you'll still want an operator, but you'll be able to build splines in 3D space. So this is where I want the drone to go over this period of time, and the drone will do it, and it'll be within millimeters of where it was supposed to go. And I've seen some R&D around that, and it's kind of amazing because you're in a space where you're building basically just drawing a spline and setting up timing, and then and what they're doing is actually controlling the speed at which it goes along that spline, but they're not actually flying it. like it's, so it does the thing that it was supposed to do, but they don't change it they don't change its position and rotation. It's still, it still wrecks a lot. It still wrecks a lot. It's not done yet. Go ahead.
You see that coming up with like WYSIWYG or something like that?
It's pretty WYSIWYG. It's using a LiDAR scan of the space.
Yeah.
So that's, they have to, it has to be perfectly accurate. And then you just kind of practice with it until it does. But again, it's not there yet. But I think that's where we're going for some of these like indoor ones where you could do high precision movements. And what it's really doing, the thought process is really creating a motion control camera that is on a drone platform. Like that's what they're trying to do. So they can repeat the move over and over and over again, exactly the same within millimeters. And, for visual effects, that's super valuable to be able to do that, but it's still not quite there. You still need incredible operators to do those at the moment. Next question.
Ken Jordan of Epsom in the UK says, is there a foolproof way to test USB Type-C cables to determine the capability?
The way I do it is I have a T5 drive. I mean, any T5 drive that I have around, or any NVMe or whatever that is a known speed. So on a known USB-C cable, I know it's 800 megs a second or 900 megs a second or whatever that number is. Then I just plug the cable in. I use Blackmagic disk speed test, and I just run it. And if it hits the number that I'm expecting or somewhere near that number, I know that that's a data USB-C. And if it hits 30 megs a second, then it's a powered USB-C. It's the best way that I found. I try to download tools and everything else, but that's been the best one that I found so far. Anyone else? Anyone else have any better solutions?
You'd think MarkerTech would come up with a USB cable tester or something like that. They have every other kind of table tester in the world.
Seems like a Gepco thing or somebody. It feels like somebody should do that. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, in addition to the speed test, also try charging a MacBook or another power-hungry device and see if it can transport the full amount of current.
Yep. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, OWC also has a speed tool as well if you don't want to use Blackmagic.
Next question.
Adam Jordan of Atlanta, Georgia says, I'm a producer AD, associate director, working in film, TV, and commercials. I want to educate myself on smart stages powered by the Unreal Engine. What's the best source of info and what roles are important in this new workflow?
It's a brave new world, in that area. I mean, I don't know what the roles are specifically because everyone's still kind of figuring a lot of this stuff out. But I think that the things that are tricky are, number one, is matching lighting and focal lengths and everything else with the real cameras to the virtual camera and making it really look like you're in front of it. So, being able to control that lighting so that when you have interactive lighting or a specific light, you can control all the color and everything else of the key lights that are actually going onto the actors so that they match the background and they match that focal length. Some of the ongoing challenges that happen for almost everybody using LEDs is the moire, and issues around compression. So really understanding those things, I think, are important. And then, obviously the camera tracking. So just being able to integrate those cameras with the Unreal Engine has proven to be, just expensive and somewhat challenging to get right. Other things to look at as you're looking at virtual sets is aliasing. I'll just point your eye towards it, and I apologize in advance that once you see it, it's hard to unsee. Most of the sets are not oversampled because that would take a lot of more CPU power. And so especially areas like long polygons where you might see, like, let's say a railing or an edge of a table, you'll see very, very small crawling across that's the aliasing that's going on from the sets. And, that's an unfortunate situation that we're in right now. That will probably get better over time. We are going to be doing training. I don't know where to get training on it, but we are going to be doing training here with Nick Justishin later this year after the Resolve training. So we're going to be doing more and more, and Nick is deep in it. He's a head of visual effects over at immersive media at Drexel. And so he's been here before talking about Unreal, and we're going to be doing more with him in the late spring, early summer. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
Yes, I asked this question, but one of the things I was baffled by is I'm currently working on a production where we have 3 stages. One's
Yep.
a smart stage, one's a traditional stage with real propage, set dressing, traditional camera, which is what I'm working and ADing right now. And looking at the dailies of both, I was surprised at how, and I won't say who I'm working with, how poor the smart stage stuff looked in comparison to what we're doing. And I think they expected a better result. So I was wondering, what's the
Yes.
difference of, because you look at something like The Mandalorian, how good it can be. What's the difference? Is it just it's all about money?
It's like
Yeah, I totally
so the
understand that.
so I mean the eventually we'll get there. Here's the problem is that to make a set look like a real set takes a lot of talent, and it takes a lot of time. And what we're seeing right now are people putting up digital sets. This has been the problem with a lot of the new tech sets and and even the Wirecast sets and everything else. Is they're good, but they're kind of broadcasty good, not like really really good. And there are people, we've built them. Like I have an artist that has built backgrounds for me that are indistinguishable from the background, the real thing. But that took a long time, and there's like 3 people I know that can do that well, that are freelance. So that's the because you're talking about in a real time, what you have to do is you have to bake in a lot of the lighting so that you have global illumination. So that's not something you're typically going to calculate. They're talking about calculating that in Unreal, but you're not really getting true global illumination or ray tracing in most solutions at the moment because they're very processor intensive. And so without those things, you're not getting that soft realism, and then you have resolution of the textures, resolution of the heart of the geometry. All of those things make it hard for a digital set to look as good as the real thing. Now, if you make it what we've done when we don't have the money to do that is to do very abstract sets, that aren't, we're obviously not trying to make it look real. It's when you try to make it look real, you're either going to hit it or you're not, and that's where, and to hit it is a lot of money and a lot of time. And, and if you're only going to, as a one use, it's almost worthless to do it that way. The real advantage of those digital sets is that I'm going to use it. Now, if you're doing a Mandalorian, it makes sense. But for corporate budget, the big advantage of the digital set, in my opinion, is the ability to have 10 sets that are available to the client, or a set for each client, and be able to switch between those at will. Is a pretty interesting thing. But yeah, I still, unless someone who really has the big budget to do it, I still shade away from virtual sets.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's definitely the assets is the problem, because the backgrounds they're using, it feels very, outdated. Has a very outdated kind of feel, green screen vibe to it.
Yep. And then the keyer makes a big difference as well. So if you're using the onboard keyer, sometimes, like an Ultimate keyer will, at 4K going down to 1080, you can get a lot, but then you have to deal with, again, the focal length and the lighting and do all those things match. When they don't, it has a very, unrealistic feel. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I was just going to focus on one word you used right at the beginning, which was artist. I mean, this is all about art and the artist knowing how to use his medium, not about, I'm an engineer. I am not an artist. I will never pretend to be an artist, but the artist has to know how to use his medium, whether it's oil, canvas, or whatever, right?
And it is, and I think that in this case, really what makes artists in a lot of ways is incredible attention to detail. I used to have a show or a little thing that I put up on the web 20 years ago. It's called Attention to Detail, where I would literally just circle things and go, look, this is how the water goes down the side of this, and this is how this goes over, here, because that's what it takes. It takes really paying attention to the real world. As we go into building those digital sets, we're probably going to bring something back from the Pixel Core, which was we used to send everybody out on missions to go take pictures of things. So everybody go take pictures of brick. Then we get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photos of brick, and then we had this huge database as a group. We now have a huge database of bricks, and then we said, okay, take pictures of wood, and everyone go take it, because when you're trying to build those sets, you need to go back to that reference material and look at it. If you look at a Mandalorian, or you look at what Pixar did, like there was a great thing I think in there in the behind the scenes of Brave, where they sent the texture artist and the modeler over to Ireland and had them take thousands of photos and study the surfaces and figure those things out. So when they came back, it was authentic. And that's the kind of research that you have to do. And I do think there's going to be a big market to tie this back. There's going to be a big market in building truly realistic sets, you know, that go into Unreal. And I think one of the things that we saw yesterday is that Unreal bought capturing reality. So capturing reality is one of the ways that you do that, which is that you're using photogrammetry. So you can actually take pictures of a set or take pictures of a location and get that 3D model information, even the texture maps back. And so now that Unreal has bought that, what I'm interested to see is if they do what they've done with other software and make it free, which would be super exciting for a lot of us. And we'll definitely do a ton of training because I've been doing photogrammetry for 20 years. And so it's, there's a couple people in our group that are pretty good at it. It's a really exciting way to digitize locations. And as we start to slowly see the mixture of LiDAR and photogrammetry, I think we're going to have a lot of fun. Next question.
Moving on, this is Charbax again, says, did anybody experience a good virtual event this past year?
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I think in a variety of areas, yeah, it wasn't terrible for me this past year. And I would start, I think, with office hours, which I think our virtual event has been pretty darn solid. I mean, you know, we're not perfect and we make a lot of mistakes, but I think in terms of information for people who have been homebound because of COVID for a long time, I think we've done a pretty good job. I would also say that the Frame.io presentation I thought was really brilliantly done. I watched in the entertainment space. I've mentioned before, my niece hooked me up with it because I wasn't aware of it. I was going to only spend 15 minutes with the Hardly Strictly Bluegrass Festival in San Francisco, and I ended up spending about 2 hours immersed in it, and I found artists that I would never have been exposed to. All of those things and others have been, for me, very positive virtual events over the course of this year.
Go ahead, Sky, and then Paul.
As far as an attendee, I attended a internal piece that was reasonable information, but they were still learning and growing. But I also attended the future media, and that Jeffrey was here yesterday on the panel, and I got to meet some new people as I would in a physical conference, NAB, etc. But also met a lot of old friends, including Jeffrey. So that was a good informational experience, well structured, a lot of behind the scenes work. And then again, the thing that I was able to do with John Preto and the crew there to observe that experience from the inside, I felt went very smoothly. So is a virtual conference opportunity available to us to get information and still make friends? Yeah.
Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I liked Willie Nelson's Luck Reunion. It was called. It was for all its imperfections, it was a whole lot of musicians struggling with a new medium, and it was kind of charming because of their struggles, you know, to try to get on the new medium, and people who have incredible stage presence and crews and semis full of equipment can't really pull it off on Zoom yet. You know, they're still figuring it out.
I mean, I think that, I mean, obviously I lean a little bit towards office hours just because I find that our average view time is really high, and it's something that has become pretty valuable. I did like the event that we worked on for the Dolby Summit. I think in the fall was kind of fun because you had meaningful information, and then you had the ability to ask questions, and people were discussing things around it. And I thought that was an interesting way to interact with the engineers, which I think I'm always looking for, how do we just get the information? There's so much of this is all siloed. And so how do we get it out to everyone? Go ahead, Nicholas.
So I've been watching your show for a couple of months, and it's really impressive. This, I think, is the perfect example of how to do a virtual event. It's like video and people actually talking to each other. There's so many virtual events where there's all these weird platforms, people are clicking. I used to go to 10-15 conference every year, right? And the CES, Mobile World Congress, there was just the Embedded World this week, last week, IFA, all these trade shows. I think they're all basically they don't know what they're doing, I think. And it's a little bit strange because...
I mean, the big challenge is that event companies are trying to stay relevant, and this is a new venue. You know, it's a new thing to figure out. And so, you know, I was fortunate enough to get to do this for a decade before COVID. so I have a different way of approaching it. Now I admit that I'm not as much into the whiz bang stuff, even though I do a lot of whiz bang for people. It's not my personal preference. And so I think that we're going to keep playing with this. I mean, we're still in this is what we can do without really any budget, like we're just having fun doing it. But as we progress, my plan is to start enlisting more people here to kind of help with us building something that's a little bit more refined. And how do we do it? And there's a couple of us talking about doing some little conferences and some other online events for us to learn together that are probably have a little bit more production value than what we have here. I think the production value here, which is very high, is the people here in the panel and the people that are asking questions. So we really invested heavily, less in graphics and more in people. And it's turned out, I think, to be a pretty good investment, from my perspective, is that it's just valuable because we have an incredible group of people that come together every week or every day. And I think that that's hard to do with a one-off shot. Like we couldn't do this the first time we did it. Like this is something that took 1,500 hours of work to get to where we are so far, and we still got a long way to go. Jeffrey.
One other thing is with conferences, it's they try to pack everything into one conference. So whereas I go for finding people to interview, maybe Doug will go for the conference tracks, or Peter will go for the networking parties or something like that. And it's all in one. This just has one component to a multi-component type of conference. And they need to figure out how they're going to do that so they can have the multi-components without shoving it into one little box.
Yeah. And I think that I do think that we're going to see, as COVID starts to recede, I think that the end winner will be digital first events, where you have individuals that are either in studios or at home or in their office, all being presenters, and then people that are either at home or at a location, or their offices or whatever. So there'll be watch parties everywhere. And so I think that, and I think you end up networking things. You look at what the Monterey Convention Center is doing, what we're doing, what other people are doing in LA and New York. You tie all those facilities together and you start ending up with something pretty interesting. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and I wanted to just mention the thing that I think attracted me most about that thing I mentioned about Hardly Strictly was that they had managed to take a narrative thread and wrap it around a live and or recorded event. So they used the conceit of a strolling musician who finds a friend and they're in Golden Gate Park, and they walk you through different areas of performance, and all the time they're talking about the history of the music and where it came from and why we're going to see this group next. So it was that combination of narrative and event that attracted me to that one particularly.
Yep. Next question.
Moving on to Michael Peters of Oakton, Virginia, said, can you describe the architecture of how Office Hours is set up and the apps and platforms it uses to broadcast?
It's very complicated. It's mostly we use meetings for the pre-show, which happens at 5 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and then meetings for the post-show, which happens at 9. After this, in between, it's a big webinar. That's all we're using from an architectural perspective. We are using Zoom to stream to YouTube, and then I am experimenting right now with streaming to using a screen scrape from as an attendee to YouTube through AWS, through a link in AWS, and that will probably grow into something more complex as we go. But anyway, and then Mickey does the edit. So Mickey manages making sure that he does the mic checks, and he makes sure that what you see as an attendee is the right thing. Bill is managing questions, and putting those together. Chad is reminding people where to go. that's next. And then we have a variety of other folks that form there's a lot of bits and pieces, and I'm going to forget. This is like one of those things when you're not, you won an Academy Award, you're trying to remember everybody, but we have other people that are helping with a lot of the other things that people are working on we have administrators inside of Discord. So Discord is a big piece of this because it creates continuity between the shows. And then we have, other folks that are regularly here. And of course the infrastructure, the most important infrastructure are the panelists and the attendees, and people willing to show up every day to have this conversation. So that's the trick to it. I don't know if anyone wants to add anything. I think that's kind of the whole.
Just
that
I
Jeffrey,
think
I want to make sure that when Jeffrey very carefully is putting an incredible amount of effort into notes that we get in YouTube, which I think is just a key piece of the resource of what we get. So Mickey and then Peter.
Yeah, we also have skyscraping the chat links
Sky.
as well.
Yep.
Which is a big help.
And all of those things, so the notes of people knowing they can get back, that Jeffrey's doing, the stuff that Mickey and Bill are doing live, the stuff that Sky puts into Discord, the Discord process, all of those things are kind of part of this tapestry that builds the show, which is still kind of amazing. Peter and then Nicholas, and then we're going to start accelerating.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I was talking. Oddly enough, I was talking to John Idleston's other group last night. One of the things I picked up early on from office hours was the need. The host is different from the moderator, different from the production engineer. 3 different roles, 3 different people to do it. So.
Yep. No, absolutely. Go ahead, Nicholas.
How many shows have you done so far? Because I think it's so impressive to go on a YouTube channel and just search any topic. And there's like 10,000, I mean, I don't know, 100,000 answers on this office hours so far. You can find anything you want, and you find the time code directly, and you can watch the whole thing. And it's so easy. It's great.
It's been, I think I don't know what the number is, but it's getting high. I don't really keep track of it.
351, I believe. Is that correct, Jeffrey?
We're closing in. We're going to celebrate our anniversary a day early, because Chris Meyer's talking about modular sound on our birthday, which is perfect in a lot of ways. The 24th, though, we'll celebrate our 1 year. It'll be the last one of the year. And so we've been doing it a lot. All right, next question. We're gonna start accelerating.
Will Patton in Chicago's in next with, how do each of you ensure your audio is exactly synced with video? Note I see several panelists with delays and several with no delay. What gives?
We do the best we can. Depends on our setup. If you have it there. So the hardest part is you don't see your own delay. You're in sync all the time with your video. You don't see your own, whether it's on or off. And it's probably something that, so far we just have enough time to check everybody's mic level. We don't have enough time to check everybody's sync, but maybe that's the next thing. Anyway, so, but a lot of our systems have, whether it's a MixPre or in my case, a Scorpio or other mixers have delays built in, and then you're able to delay. It's typically the audio is getting there first. Next question.
Michael Peters of Oakton, Virginia says, webcast, webinar, virtual meeting, virtual conference, et cetera, et cetera. What are the differences, and what is the proper term to use for each?
I tend to, as a person who does this, tends not to talk about webinars or webcasts. I feel like webinars, the name has been kind of sullied by GoToMeeting mostly, and so when you see webinar, I think that a lot of people have a sideways view of the word webinar. So I think that it's kind of a name that needs to go away. I know that Zoom has an entire platform built on it, which is unfortunate, but the name itself it's not the structure, but the name is kind of, and then webcast makes it feel like you're going to look at a little thing. So I tend to call my things just online events, or digital first events, or sometimes virtual, and virtual events are kind of what I tend to go towards. Go ahead, Stuart.
Just quickly, I'd like to propose a collective noun for this: a confusion of platforms.
There you go. Yeah. So, next question. We're gonna keep moving.
Idris Haji of Fairfax, I presume, Virginia. What's the best wireless audio microphone system for a large classroom for Zoom, where each table gets a small wireless mic?
Ooh. Best? This is the worst.
Never say that word to Alex.
Yeah, I mean, you can get an Axient system for the whole classroom if you're looking for best. That's what happened. One thing to look at that might be useful for some of this stuff is things like a Microflex. It's not the cheapest one, but it's a really convenient one in a classroom too. Everything's auto. You can kind of auto organize it and then put it out there, and it manages a fair number of channels. If you have too many classrooms next to each other, it won't work very well because of the way the platform works. It only has about 32 to 38 channels that are typically available, unless you go to low resolution, which you can get up to 50. But those channels can start to get congested if you have a whole bunch of classrooms next to each other or a whole bunch of offices. But overall, for a classroom, I think that it's probably one of the easiest ones, maybe not the cheapest. Go ahead, JJ, Bill, and Jeffrey, real quick, because we're running out of time.
I just want to ask whether or not to amplify this question, if the wireless microphone would it be powered by USB, like if you could plug it in at the table?
I mean, for a classroom, you wouldn't. Again, with a Microflex, you wouldn't need it. You would just, But yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey, and then Bill.
If anything, if you've got a wireless system that are multiple wireless systems in multiple classrooms, try and get a focused antenna so you can at least get your wireless as best as possible.
With a lot of classrooms, you'll end up with, frequency coordination will be a big deal. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and I was going to say, when I said table, each table will have a wireless mic. In a classroom, that to me is either a pass around something, or you're in all sorts of difficulty with people around a table trying to get a good signal to noise ratio.
Again, like a Dugan Auto Mix with a wireless, like you just have to figure out. Someone's going to have to manage that a little bit to make that work. But it's definitely something that it'd be a really fun project to work on. Next question.
Francisco Manriquez of Sonoma, California. Open question. Which Headworn mic with earpiece would you recommend for teaching, settling it at under $200 US?
I mean, it's not wireless now. It's just Headworn mic with earpiece. I mean, I would buy those at $200. I would still buy. I don't think that there's any Headworn mic that over $30 that's significantly anything under $200. At the under $200 range, I think they're all kind of the same. Go ahead, Mickey.
There are a few options from Shure around that price range, or maybe at 250 US that you might want to look at. I'm not familiar with the models and their quality, but I know they're being used by a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. They're pretty big though, aren't they? The Shure ones at that price, they're kind of bulky.
Bigger than an H6, definitely.
Yeah. I'd be interested. We should get some of them and kind of compare them, because I'm really interested to see how much better they sound and whether it would be worth it. And then they don't have headsets, right? They're like $150, and then you still need to get a headset for them.
I think they can be less. I think I have a Shure that was about 85 or something like that
Okay.
I used for a little while.
Let's take a look at it. Yep. Next question.
Ken Jordan Epsom in the UK says, what's the recommended way to connect the audio output from a MixPre-6 II to an M1 Mac? Note, I presumably now have it working by directly connecting it to my M1 via USB-C, as going through my OWC Thunderbolt 3 dock failed. I'm not sure if you noticed.
So I have to admit that I almost never connect. It's the problem that I have with not enough outputs, is that I almost always direct both the ATEM and the MixPre or whatever audio device I have directly to the computer. Nothing in between. That's something that I tend to be a little superstitious about. And I found that I have very few problems with it. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, whenever I need to send data that has to be continuously sent in time, like say video feeds or audio feeds, I always go direct to the machine.
Yeah. Next question.
Charbax again, do you prefer Davinci Resolve over Final Cut Pro and Adobe Premiere? I'm on an M1 and Tony says it's now officially supported.
I prefer Final Cut and Resolve. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, different tools for different purposes, and they each have their specialty. So there's not there's a preference for the task at hand, but overall, I'd say no.
Yeah, good. Bill and then Nicholas. Real quick.
You're an artist. Do you prefer to play the piano or the organ? I will say that Final Cut is a different set of thinking. It works kind of differently, and so you have to approach it differently. But they all get the job done.
Yeah, go ahead, Nicholas.
I'm using the free trial on Final Cut. So I'm really hoping when it's finished that Davinci Resolve will be fully smooth on the M1 because it's free. So that's kind of awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a great reason to take a look at it for precision work, especially related to color and surround sound and so on and so forth. I lean towards Resolve for speed and ease of use, and what I use on a day-to-day basis when I have to cut something and throw it out there, I use Final Cut. Next question.
Alex Forty Goldner in London says OTOY, OTOY, have released their high-end 3D renderer to the Mac App Store. It will be free for the first year. Is this a viable go-to-market marketing strategy for software and services targeting high-end production?
My guess is that they are gamma testing to all of us, and so so they want to make sure that we can all I think they don't want to take our money until they see how it works in the platform, so I think it's a very valid way to do it if you can afford it. So if you can, and I think that part of the reason that they're paying more attention to it is the performance of the new Macs, the new Mac Pros, and then the coming M1s. And I think that they're going to want to, they want to make sure that they're not falling behind in that solution, because there's a strong potential that by next year, the new Mac Pros will be incredibly fast. And so I think that this is a genius move by OTOY, and I have a feeling I know who was working on the programming. And so I bet you the rendering is going to be great. So, anyway, that it's an incredible platform to render to. And so it's a really big opportunity, and we will dig into it a little later. I just don't want to overwhelm everybody with new things to learn. So 3D, I'm still trying to figure out what platform and how we're going to integrate it into what we're doing. Next question.
Paul Wallace has a question for Charbax. What's your secret to getting millions and millions of views on YouTube? And don't say hard work. Come on. It's got to be a button you push somewhere.
Go, Nicholas.
So basically, it's just the long tail. Just produce awesome stuff that you're passionate about, and it's going to get views because people are going to find it. Like all these office hours have so much content, and then I think there's going to be deep linking very soon in YouTube. So when people search for stuff, they'll go exactly to the right time code, and it's just going to show up. Like just do the long tail. There's like billions of topics out there.
That's great. Thank you. Sky.
As a teacher, my wife is saying it's not learning the topic, it's learning how to ask the question. And so because the information's out there, so consequently they're not learning, we're not memorizing how to do math in the sense of the times tables. The question is how to ask better questions.
In our family, we say it's not what you know, it's how well you Google. It's just, but it's to that point. But yeah, it's great.
Which puts the responsibility over on the content creators to put nice big hooks out there so that hopefully you'll get it.
Absolutely. And welcome, Nicholas. It's good to have you here. Next question.
Blackmagic Pocket Cinema 6K is the subject, and the ATEM mini users from TJ Asher of Minneapolis. When setting the color temperature of the camera from the ATEM, it seems that the color temperature is backwards. Setting the temp to a lower number makes the image cooler than I would expect it to make the image warmer. What am I doing wrong?
Go ahead, Roscoe.
It's telling you what the camera is expecting to see as far as the white quality of the light. So therefore, if you tell it to expect 3200 and it gets 5600, it's definitely going to look wrong.
Yeah, it's going to look warm. Because in this case, cooler is the higher number than the and warmer is the lower number. And so getting them mix matched is what makes one look blue or warm. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, TJ, you're actually not doing anything wrong. That's the way it's meant to behave.
Next
Not
question.
a bug, it's a feature. Moving on, TJ Asher has another Blackmagic 6K question. Is there a way to get the HDMI out to not be a clean feed and instead show the frame rate, ISO, shutter aperture, and so forth? If not, how do you verify what settings the camera has without being behind the camera?
I can turn mine. I don't think I can show it, but you can absolutely do that. I'm just trying to see if I can see if I fire this up and
it's in the settings.
It's in the settings. It's in the monitor. So if you turn off in your HDMI out, you can turn off clean feed, and then you have to decide what you want to what you want to add to that to that output, and so I'm trying to see if I can see all.
And if you Bluetooth to the camera, you will be able to see what the settings are on the Bluetooth app.
And there's a little software utility called ATEM Software Control that comes with the camera that gives you access to a lot of these readings.
Yeah. So anyway, it's in the monitor settings that you should be able to turn all of those things on. Next question.
Jeff Greenberg's listening from Philadelphia and says, I need a camera mount adjustment suggestion. I have a Manfrotto mount bolted to my standing desk. I want to be able to reach out and adjust it without having to tighten or loosen mounts. Suggestions? And he says A5100 lightweight mirrorless is his camera, and great experience yesterday. He says, thanks. Nice to have you here, Jeff.
This is a constant issue. I'm working on, this is I think we've talked about in the past, this is the beginning of my solution. It's not done yet, but it's the beginning of it. So it's there's just a piece of it laying on my desk at the moment. It's a problem we've had of being able to reach out, or more importantly, for me, I want to be able to not control it from my desk or be able to control it somewhere else in the world. And so being able to build a kind of a motorized, thing that will let me do those pieces is what I'm working on. But I actually don't have a great solution for being able to reach out and make those adjustments. Bill, and then Mickey.
Well, in camera work, there are ways. I mean, jib arms that are counterbalanced through weights, microphone arms that are spring balanced with heavy springs to hold them in place once you set them. So the problem has been solved, but there's not a lot of really cheap, easy, and simple ones that I know that are out there. You just have to adapt something.
The hardest part is the ones that you can just kind of grab and move around. It's hard to keep them from tilting. You end up kind of in a weird position. Mickey?
Yeah, one possible solution is to get a fluid head that is oversized for the camera, and then pump up the drag on it. Make sure the camera is well balanced on the head first, then pump up the drag. But whenever you walk away from that desk, lock it off.
Isn't that called PTZ?
Yeah, but if you're putting the camera on it, the problem is that at that size, you end up with the problem with PTZs in general, the all-in-one PTZs, is that the optics are not very great. And so there's a Bestco, I think, makes one that's like $300 or $400 that you might be able to get that camera onto, but most of my cameras are too heavy for it. It won't be something that you can, it's not something that you'd want to do while you're on camera, but it is something that you could theoretically make some, and then Rushworks will make ones that are more expensive that have a side loaded PTZ, to Michael's thing, that you can put a camera on and then move it around. It's just that those when they can handle a camera with any weight, they tend to start getting more expensive.
Those Bestcores work, but you can't be precise with them. You're kind of like, I want it about there.
Yep. And and of course, because you didn't say cheap, I don't think you saw inexpensive. The ultimate solution is the DJI Ronin with the gear, the simulated gear wheels controller, which someday I'll put in my studio. Like, it's only $15,000 for the pair. All right, next question.
Edwin R. Ruiz of Chicago. Ruiz. Hi, Alex and team. I'm creating a podcasting kit to mail out to remote guests for under $80 US. I purchased the Polson and Pile headsets and the TechRise USB sound adapter. Neither microphone shows levels. Tested with the G3 wireless system in between, and it works. Your thoughts on fixes or other gear options?
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I wonder if you possibly got the versions that are wired for Sennheiser, since they work for Sennheiser. Solutions: chop the connector off and solder a new one on. If you don't know how to solder, this is a good reason to learn. It's simple enough. Mini jacks are simple enough to put together.
We have turned a corner on Saturday. I'm going to warn you that we're building this little Raspberry Pi thing, but somewhere in the future there is like soldering Saturdays, where we just we're all going to order. We're all going to just start soldering some stuff up. Good, Mickey, we'll get Mickey to show it. We'll find a time that works for Mickey, and we'll all buy an 1/8" jack and some wire, and we'll just solder with Mickey, and then we'll have a little close-ups of like what our solders look like, and he'll say, no, you got too much, too much
cold joint, cold solder.
Yeah, exactly, Roscoe.
Yeah, if he just to make sure, if you got the new Tech Risers with the oval buttons, you have to pull the microphone out one notch. It'll still stick. It'll still be grabbed onto it. It won't just fall out, but you have to pull it back one notch or it won't work. The old Tech Risers, which have the round buttons, you punch it all the way in. It works perfectly.
We should all go up to Amazon or go up to Amazon and complain all at one time. just like that would show the power once again of office hours. Next question.
Commenting. That'd be interesting. Moving on.
Yep.
TJ Asher, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K users. Do you apply a LUT to your HDMI out, or do you have it plain? If you apply a LUT to the HDMI output, which LUT do you use?
Yeah, go ahead, Roscoe.
Well, I run them in raw mode, so yes, you have to apply a LUT just in order to get it to look decent when it's coming out the HDMI. So the answer is yes, and video extended seems to work well.
So Yeah, video, you can do video. It'll look a little, I think it looks a little contrasty with video. So I think that it works a little bit better with video extended. And then I crush it myself inside of the ATEM switcher, which I find to be a little bit better. I do look a little less saturated probably because of that, but I like that look, the look that I have right now anyway. What I am working towards is putting LUTs into the camera, and the way I'm working on it right now, and I just haven't gotten something I'm happy with yet, is to capture the raw image, bring it into Resolve, and then build a LUT for that image, and then load it back onto the camera. And then that gets me, the idea is to get to a point where I'm 90% where I want to be, 90, 95%. And what the switcher, right now, the switcher is making heavy corrections. The switcher would just make tiny little corrections based on what I'm doing. And I think that that's probably the future that I'm going to go towards, but I'm not ready to show it to you yet. I haven't quite figured it out. Go ahead, Bill.
And if you're using a Blackmagic camera with an ATEM Mini or some other ATEM switcher, you can save your profile once you do your color correction. And I just showed that software control. It gives you a lot of control over your color and brightness and everything else. You can save that. And that's why if you see me start up every day, I eventually go black and restart. And that's me restoring the settings from the ATEM that work for my camera.
Next question.
Roberto Barrow of Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania says, to spotlight someone in Zoom, do you have to have a paid account? I see how to pin someone, but I don't see where to spotlight.
Go ahead, Mickey.
No, you don't have to pay to have a paid account. There needs to be at least three or more, at least three people on the meeting or webinar with their video on for you to be able to spotlight someone. And of course, you have to be a host or co-host as well.
Yep. There you go. All right, shifting gears. We made it through. That was a lot of questions. That was we did well. I think that it was good. It was a great velocity. I think that we moved through a lot of questions very well. So well done to the panel. Now we're going to switch to compression, and I think we end up with a lot of questions around compression. So I thought it would be useful for us to, kind of back up and just talk about just the basics of it. And this isn't so much the live compression, that you're streaming out. They're related, but it's really thinking about how we compress footage in general for delivery. So if you have questions about compression specifically, this is a good time to ask it. Does anyone have any opening remarks of how they approach things before we jump into the questions? No. All right. Well, then we'll jump into the questions. Go ahead, Bill.
Okay, the first one comes from Patrick Shonis of Little Rock, Arkansas. And his question is, when evaluating the target bitrate of a video stream, how much bandwidth saturation do you aim for? I'm sure it's based on the format, RTMP, HLS, SRT, and so forth. But in general terms.
So this is a streaming compression question, but we can answer a couple of these. It is generally the minimum requirement that I look at is 2x the resolution. So what I mean by that is if you have a 2 megapixel, what I'm shooting for is if I have a 2 megapixel, so 720p is about 2 megapixels. I want 4 megabits per second. Like that's what I'm targeting for that. And if I want a little bit better, I'll go a little above and a little below. But that's what so my rule of thumb, we build things with lots of ladders that are complex and other things like that, is in H.264 specifically. H.265 is a little bit more efficient. In H.264, I'm looking at what's the megapixel of what I'm putting out, and then I multiply that by 2, and that's kind of like that's where we'll start. And that's the that's kind of where we kind of think through that. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, I approached the answer to that one from the other end. I'd run speed test and see what you're getting and run it to multiple destinations, then divide that bandwidth that you've got available by half and don't try to upload any more than that.
Well, usually I ask for
overhead
twice.
problems.
I go the other way where I figure out what I need and then I request it. But to Stuart's point, I request half, double whatever I think I need. Go ahead, Bill.
My experience has been kind of interesting in terms of compression. When I started, I used to do every single output, particularly for broadcast when I was working in broadcasters, bespoke. I set compression and everything. When COVID hit, we had a whole series of crisis communication pieces that had to go out for one of my clients. And so I said, listen, the fastest way I'm going to get them to you is just put them on Vimeo. I'm going to put them up there at a really high raster, pull down the one you want. And Vimeo, as most of you know, does a whole series of compressions, and you can pick the one you download. Surprised the heck out of me that almost all of the broadcasters were able to find a compression on Vimeo that they worked for broadcast. We watched them on the air. They all look good. And so I think there are going to be some standards that are going to be set by those content distribution networks. They're going to make this a little easier in the future, so you don't have to bespoke everything.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm doing it, I'm building the ladders directly. And so, and again, what I would say is that 2x is minimum, 3x is good, 4x is optimum. Anything over 4x the megapixel. So, and I had my math wrong with the 720p. It's the 1080p is a 2 megapixel image. And in that 2 megapixel image, I'm looking for middle of the road to me is 6 megs a second for a 1080p stream. The upper end is 8 megs. Over 8 megs, I kind of feel like we have to be really sure we need something more than that to do that. What I will say related to that also is you have to know whether you're doing delivery. What I'm talking about is actual delivery resolution, as opposed to mezzanine bit rate. So if as a mezzanine bit rate, that when you send to YouTube is your mezzanine bit rate. It is not what's going out to everyone. YouTube decides that, right? So what you want to do is you want that to be typically, if you can, a little higher than what it's going to need. So a 6 or 8 meg, 8 meg 1080p going into YouTube gives YouTube plenty of room to work. Whereas if you send in a 2 meg stream of 1080p, it's not going to look very good. So, and those are things that is related to compression as far as figuring out you definitely have a limited amount of space, and you just have to budget that well. And there's other ways to budget that, in that process too. So some of the things that affect whether you're doing live streaming or whether you're doing a file is things like how often are you going to lay a keyframe? So are you going to lay a keyframe every 30 frames, every 60 frames, every 90 frames? So those are what we call GOPs, the group of pictures between those keyframes. And how often are you going to do that will greatly affect the quality of your image at a given bandwidth. Go ahead, Mickey.
And yeah, with that equation, like I don't know if we're allowed to speak of it or if there's data out, but how does that relate in terms of HLG?
Oh, yeah, it's all different. Because now that's what I'm talking about is Rec 709. That's a Rec 709 H.264. So you can get away with a little less with H.265 because H.265 is a little bit more efficient. If you're doing something that is something like HLG or HDR10 or Vision or something, you have more color. So you have a 10-bit image rather than an 8-bit image. And so you're going to need to make it significantly 50% bigger, in my opinion. You add that, you do that math, and then go up. Now you kind of get that back with the H.265, but not all the way. So I would say when you're going out, because you're not going to get, you need the H.265 to get the 10-bit out, of what you're doing. So that's a whole. I mean, we're now digging into a deep area, but you need H.265, which is more efficient than H.264, but you also need more bit depth. So the math that I threw out there was definitely 709 H.264 math, which is what 99% of the people are compressing right now. Next question.
Moving on, we have one from Ray Maxwell here on the panel, and Ray says, what is the best way to import Blackmagic Raw into Final Cut Pro 10? When you figure it out, let us know.
I would say that the best way is to go through Resolve. And and then you're going to decide how you're going to output it. But you have to. That's how I was using Resolve for years before I, or for at least a year before I started actually editing with it. Was just because I needed to convert my clips to Apple ProRes, on the way through. Mickey and then Roscoe.
Yeah, that's typically like even for other raw formats from other cameras. Most of the time they end up filing it in Resolve. So they bring it to Resolve, create proxies from there, and then bring it into the NLE that they're using, reconform it back into Resolve, relink to the original files, and color from there.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, the sad truth is you can't directly bring Blackmagic Raw into Final Cut. It just doesn't work. You have to transcode to something else before you do that.
And we're gonna give me a second on TJ's. Go to the next question, because I want to see if I might have an image to show for that next one.
Absolutely. We're going to Ray Maxwell then, of Vancouver, British Columbia. And Ray asked, if you have time, I have a story about a production team that did not understand the compression of the delivery system. We love stories.
Story. Tell us a story,
Okay.
Ray.
All right. Once upon a time, Sky, what's the name of the guy who does the travel show out of Seattle? Steve?
Rick Steves.
Rick Steves. Thank
He's
you.
Literally a neighbor here in Edmonds, Washington, ironically.
Okay. Years ago, he was producing a show and they filmed the Sistine Chapel. And the cameraman did what I call painting. He didn't have a wide enough lens. So he started painting, panning back, down, panning back, and painting in the Sistine Chapel. And I wrote them. I took the time to write them a letter and said, guys, when you paint like that, the compression, the final delivery compression, can't handle that. All right. Even if you think that's what you want to do, is do this painting, but the delivery compression will tear and break up. You just can't do it that way. They wrote me back and said, we have the finest recording system on earth, and in post-production it looks perfect. They didn't get it, that I was talking about. You have to think in terms of your final delivery compression, which in those days was MPEG. And it just looked horrible.
Yeah, I think we've all been in that circumstance.
Ray, I cannot believe we're having this conversation. I was the post editor on that show. Victory Studios here in Seattle rented Rick Steves, one of the few and only that 900 Sony camera, and they drug that thing. There's Rick Steves, his producer, also named Steve, and their cameraman here from Seattle traveled the world, crammed all this stuff into gear, and they would come back with the full loads of these HD tapes. At the time, that was the highest quality they could get. We would digitize those into an Avid. They would do it all in their Avids right here in Edmonds, Washington, and then we would get an EDL from their offline. Then we would online that from their original masters into an Avid DS. Then in Davinci down below, the original machine, they would color correct it. Then it would all go back onto an HD Digibeta master.
I mean, the big problem as we come to compression, one of the big things is just understanding detail and the diversity of the image, because as the image becomes more diverse and as you build those all up, it just can't. You have a budget, and when you run out of that budget, you just run out of colors, you run out of detail, you run out of all those other things. And so what you have to be careful of. It's one of the reasons that, for instance, a background like this works better than a busy background, because more of these pixels can be grouped together behind me, which means more of the compression will spend more of its time on my face. And especially when it comes to something like streaming or Zoom or something like that, a simpler background behind you, or a blurry background, or something that's out of focus that has less detail in it, is something that is actually going to allow. And where you really see this is the opposite. It's why when you put an LED wall behind somebody, they will often, the foreground person talking to you, the presenting in front of the LED wall, will become all macro blocked, because the compression goes, oh, there's a lot of detail back there. And it doesn't have enough detail left for the thing that's moving, because things that aren't moving, it knows what to do with those, but it's using up tons of spatial compression to do that. Now we can jump to TJ's question now. I think I have
okay. All set. Then TJ in Minneapolis says, can you briefly explain compression to me like I'm in first grade? Why do we compress, and what does compression do?
So if you think about it this way, this is from a piece of that thing I don't think I talked very much to, is you're trying to get to a capture card, and that capture card is grabbing all of these raw frames. Now those raw frames, each raw frame might be 50 megabytes for every single frame. The compressed version might be 200 or 300 kilobytes, for every single frame. So you're getting rid of an enormous amount of information, between those. And so to become efficient for that, what you need is to start looking at the spatial data. You're looking at things, you're basically breaking this up. Now, this is a very simplistic version of this. This is an actual breakup, but it's basically breaking these little grids and going, these colors are like these colors, and these colors are like these colors, and these colors are like these colors. And as it starts to group them together, it can smartly start to put that out. Now, for what you do with compression is in a group of frames, you have this is a whole frame. So first there's the spatial compression that goes down to that 200 to 300 kilobytes per frame, but it has a whole frame and then a bunch of little frames and then a whole frame. And what it's doing is inside of that, it has P frames that are basically looking back at the frame that was the original frame. And it's that what they're looking for is what changed. And then you also have B frames, which are looking in both directions but basically between those P frames, you have B frames that are looking back at the original frame of that group of pictures and the next P frame. And all of these together are what we call a GOP, and so that GOP is a group of pictures. And it's why you can't, like if you rewind, if you rewind an H.264, everything breaks up because those are all the partial frames that are there. Because if you go the other direction, it doesn't have reference for it. If you go forward, it has a reference of, I started with this image and I know what these other images are based on that image. Whereas if you go backwards, it's like, I don't know what you meant to do there. here's a bunch of pixels for you. And so, so the thing is that there's two big things that you're dealing with in general, and that is your spatial compression and your temporal compression. And so the spatial compression is like JPEG. Like if you export JPEG out of a Photoshop, I don't know if this is for a first grader, but my kids understood what JPEGs were. So anyway, when you export out a JPEG file, that is a spatial compression. The temporal compression is what I just talked about, which is that how do I compress between those two files? So it might be two JPEGs, but I want to even make it even smaller by shrinking down and only taking the things that changed. And that is why when you're compressing, whether it's for live or whether it's in post, shaky cameras, detailed backgrounds, all of those things, you'll hear us talk about it defeating the compression. You're defeating the compression algorithms by doing that. So, it's not that you shouldn't do it, but you just need to know that if you do too much of it, and you'll see it sometimes in a high motion shot, you'll see it. Like the problem for me is that I can even watch Apple TV, and in a high detailed, high motion shot, you'll see a little macro blocking around people. Typically the smaller things going across it, you'll see these little squares. The squares are what we call macro blocking. If you want to see a lot of macro blocking, look at the night battle the night battle for Game of Thrones is like a master's course in what not to do. Like it's just, and what's amazing is they never went back and fixed it. I just looked at, we were talking about it. I was like, I wonder if they've ever fixed that, went through and put more data in. No, they did not. Go ahead, John Preto.
So almost everything that Alex just said there, I posted a video that we produced, I don't know, probably 15 plus years ago on Hello World in our training system. And is it
still up there?
Yeah, I just posted in Makana.
Oh, great. Perfect.
And it's a little simpler. In the old days, we called it intra versus inter frame compression.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Absolutely. Go ahead, Bill, and then Roscoe.
I just wanted to address the part where he was saying, why do we compress? We compress because the throughput in your computer can't handle giant screens. And take, for example, the music video we did for the remotes. I had 16 videos that were full size originally on screen at once playing back. Without some form of compression, that just can't happen. It'll clog any system in the world.
Yeah, go ahead, Roscoe, and then Ray.
Okay, for the kindergartner, would you like to have 10 pennies or would you like to have a dime?
Oh, that's good.
Because I would rather have the dime. It has the same value. It carries the same information, and I can use the 10 pennies, but it's smaller, and I can move around dimes easier.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Ray.
Yeah, what you use compression where there is a bottleneck in bandwidth. In other words, where in the system is the minimum bandwidth that you have to squeeze your information through. And the engineering term for all this compression is run length encoding. In other words, as was explained as, you know, you'd have a keyframe and then you have these changes in temporal. That's run length encoding.
Right. Next question.
Sky Gleason of Seattle, Washington, and here in the panel says, would level 101 on Apple's ProRes sequence of their different levels, 422, 444, HD, it proxy, and so forth. What's the best use case and why? And for example, he's filming on VHS will not look better than a digibeta tape.
Oh, delivered. See,
I'm sorry.
Again, you're starting with the negative, the biggest you can, and oftentimes we H.264 into the DSLRs was horrible, but it was cheap and it was free and the license was available. But as a capture, it's not a good capturing format originally. But
go ahead, Bill.
So all formats for writing the digital information have compromises. They have to. I mean, complete uncompressed everything with every bit. The files get so big so fast you can't work with them. So ProRes became incredibly popular because it was a really good combination of file size and quality, and it kind of swept through the world because it was one of the biggest ones. Apple owned the whole thing, so they could license it, and they were very free about allowing others to use it. That's basically, and then the forms of that gets very technical into how many bits you have for luminance versus chroma. Proxies are really a mathematical, usually raster reduction, so that instead of having the full 640 by 480, you're dropping it down to 320 by 240 or something like that. So all of these things are to get that same thing to take place, which is to allow you to work with footage smoothly without having your computer choke on it.
So the and kind of the nuts and bolts of how I approach it is that if I have if I'm doing mostly like corporate or web or we're recording from Zoom, I usually use LT. I think that proxy is kind of worthless to me. Like I just don't even bother with it. It just drives me crazy. So LT is something that I'll use, especially for ISOs. We're recording Zoom. I don't need more data, but I want that much data. It's relatively efficient. 422 is what is a lot of times what we work with if we're not doing high, if we're not doing 10-bit. We're doing 422 is a pretty common one for us to just kind of use. I'm not doing keying. I'm not doing anything that's special. I think that I can usually get away with 422. 422 HQ, a lot of people use, and I feel like they just kind of overkill unless there's a lot of color in it. So HQ is what I use for when I'm doing HDR or I need to protect the bit depth so that I can do more color correction, especially if I think I'm gonna do a lot of color correction. I may still use that. If I'm coming from a raw capture, I will always go back into I almost always go back into HQ because I want to make sure that I keep that data there. Now, then you go up to there's 422 and then there's 444. So the 422 is that I have subsampled my color. So it'll stair step if I'm keying. So 444 becomes really important when I'm there's a couple things. When I'm gonna key it, that's when I really want to use it. Computer graphics, I'll tend to keep it that way, but also the 444 means it can carry an alpha channel, and so in that alpha channel,
that was my next question.
So if I want to export something out that's going to be a key fill output, for instance, from a HyperDeck Mini, or some kind of playout, I need to be 444. So those are the kind of the more less, just like how I use it every day. I very rarely use XQ. I have to admit that I just don't have a lot of stuff that has required that. I'm not saying it doesn't require it, but it's there. Ray, and then we'll move on.
I just wanted to point out that ProRes, all the formats are not temporally compressed. Every frame contains all the information. It's only specially compressed.
That's an intra frame. Next question.
Gabriel Ong in Malaysia says, when exporting MP4 files from Final Cut Pro 10 using compressor defaults, the files are quite large due to high bit rates. Is there a good sweet spot for bit rates?
It depends. It depends. I do end up building my own. I tend to build up my own pieces. I'll show you one of the ones that I use a lot. Let me share this out here. Oh, I'm not a host or co-host.
Oops.
There we go. let's see. So if I find the, it's interesting. Compressor. Does it show it there?
I'm not seeing it, but I don't know if anybody else
Hold on.
is.
Did that show it? There we go.
Yes.
So this is what we load onto our elementals. And so it's just kind of a happy medium here. Now this is set to up to 1920 by 1080. Of course, you can hard code it to be there. I usually run most of these if I'm doing 1080p at 6 megapixels. I'm sorry, 6 kilobits per second, or 6,000 kilobits, 6 megabits per second. But you'll notice that my keyframe interval is very high. So 200 frames. This mix tends to get you pretty high quality. It will not handle slow pans very well. So there's certain things that it doesn't do, but on average, this is a pretty good combination. I also generally turn off multipass because it takes forever, and so when you turn off multipass, it goes really, really fast. And if I don't like it, if I see some hips or things between cuts that are problematic, I go back and do multipass, but I won't do it out of the gate. But I find that you'll find that file size, especially with that, is pretty high quality. Of course, you're talking about variable bit rate versus constant bit rate. So when you put constant bit rate in, it's always going to try to hit 6 plus or minus a little. Variable means that if you show a still, it won't use very much data, but different playback systems either like or don't like that. So you have to kind of keep that in mind. Go ahead, Stuart, and then Bill.
I'm just curious as to how those settings deal with fast motion. I was looking at those and I was a little surprised because that's a lower bit rate and a much higher keyframe interval than I would use for doing motorsport or
I would never,
for that matter.
I wouldn't use that for motorsport. Most sports it'll do okay. Motorsport, I would not do that because motorsport has a very specific challenge, which is that you have small objects moving very quickly across a large frame. And that is something that high keyframe rates and heavy compression means that all kinds of funny things happen to it. And it'd be fun to take some of your footage, Stuart, and play with, like if you had some raw footage that we could use, it'd be fun to run it through a bunch of different compressions and see and show where it breaks up, where it comes apart. Because it would be fun to take different things to do that because if we did some stuff with motorsport, we definitely changed all of our compression. This is just a rule.
I shall look for a file for you. I have some stuff that was actually shot on the Scion of jet cars, leaving the line at a drag race. So you've got the plume, the smoke, and it was fun compressing that just for Vimeo.
And note that you can, if you set that to automatic, rather the data rate to automatic rather than rather than custom or whatever, it will. Well, no, actually, if you put that long keyframe, it will actually get really small because it'll really just annihilate it.
I know. I meant the file size for that with the smoke billowing and the flames and whatever. There's so much data. It's like looking at ripples on a pond, which is really nasty for pretty much every intra-frame codec.
I shoot. There's a place in Bodega Bay that I have footage that I shoot that it can't be compressed. like it's just and so it's a good one to test, like how bad will it be, but it's not will it work, it's just how bad will it look. Go ahead, Bill.
I also, since you mentioned Final Cut Pro specifically, 10, and now they're just calling it Final Cut. Its original design spec was that it would not make any decisions about compression for you. And that got a lot of us in the early days into trouble because you'd take something like a still frame that was 60 megapixels and bring it into Final Cut. And even if you shrank it down to something really small, it still saw that as 60 megapixels. You put an array of those out and you would choke your machine down. The same way with video, it doesn't presume anything other than this is what you want to bring in. So be careful when you bring in content that you're not bringing in stuff that is much, much bigger than you need to work with, because Final Cut will not dumb it down when you bring it in. So if you have a bunch of high-res sources, it's going to have trouble compressing those.
Yep. Next question.
Alex 40 Goldner is up next with, if you know your bandwidth is low, would you change the branding to avoid the banding, I guess, or the branding to avoid gradients?
Branding, yeah.
Or reduce as much as possible the branding elements that have gradients. Okay, like logos with.
Yeah, absolutely. we when we're dealing with real time and anything that's low res, there are certain things that we try to get rid of. Primary colors is one that you can't always, but when someone, if it's not part of the brand and it's pure red, we were like, hey, probably look better if we used a different color than red. Red just will block up really, really fast. And then we absolutely try to get rid of gradients. We try to get rid of gradients most of the time because what you're dealing with is very, very small color changes over a distance in a gradient. And it's very hard to represent those and compress them at the same time. So you either end up with really high bandwidth or you end up with banding, which is why I think Bill was having trouble reading that, because what we all know is gradients equal banding. So that's the thing you have to watch. Go ahead, Sky, and then we'll move on.
I was very curious if that was the original origin of the original black and white commercials for Apple, because as they were forward thinkers, they changed the metaphor often. I mean, I know it's very funny, but again, if you're in a compression internet and that our bandwidth was not what it was even 20 years ago when that series came out. So to eliminate all the gradient,
I doubt. I think it was probably just more of a keep yourself focused on the content. I don't think that Apple would care about that. They'd be able to figure it out. But go ahead, Chris, real quick, and then we'll move on.
I'll say that Apple's compressions are usually quite large. Even their presets yield a pretty large file. I'll also say that 15, 20 years ago, we had some very interesting face-to-face meetings with Apple's compression team. They actually sent people to our office and said, we'd like to talk about some of the things you're doing. And one of the things they said is, stop doing stuff at 30 frames, do it at 24. It's 25% less frames. You'll get your quality will go up.
Which is where film originally came from and why we had 24.
I know.
Persistence of illusion. It's the same. 100 years later.
Yeah, it's a religious conversation. Anyway, so the funny thing is MacBreak for at least 5 years, MacBreak video, when we were doing them out of our office, were all 2398. And the reason we did that specifically was bandwidth. Like it was just reducing it by a fifth or whatever was the only reason I did that. The other big things that made those files really small were those long keyframes. So when you have a background, like little things like, because I was keying the background, there's no grain in the background. And when there's no grain in the background, it gets super efficient. So having a variable bit rate where it's allowed to go lower if it needs to, and only having people talking in front where they're not moving very much in a background without any grain, is one of the reasons we could do 1080p files in 2005 and do 15 minutes and 230 megs or whatever, was because we had that background that was automatically, getting rid of, those are huge chunks of no data. Next question.
Henry Ramos of Yonkers, New York says, any chance of Davinci Resolve supporting Magic YUV codec? I understand that is what vMix AVI codec uses, and would like to allow us to directly edit vMix recordings without converting. Seems Vegas and Adobe support it.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's primarily a gaming, I believe, codec that the gamers are using, and it is supposed to be totally lossless and that kind of stuff. Blackmagic has BRAW. I don't see any reason why they're going to necessarily swap out what they're doing with BRAW. They know how it works. They're happy with it. So will they support it? Maybe, but will they build it in like they will BRAW? No.
Would the question is really, will Blackmagic support anything that makes it easier for vMix? I don't know. Go ahead, Stuart.
Okay, firstly, Magic YUV has been around forever, and it's not the default codec for vMix. vMix have their own default codec. You can select the Magic YUV codec in vMix and what have you. I'm surprised that Davinci Resolve doesn't support Magic YUV. It's been around probably 20 years.
I think they're just making a decision about what they want to support.
Yep. There is a tool that comes with vMix. It's in the distribution now that will actually do that conversion for you to your chosen codec. Whatever your program supports, just choose one of those.
I would love Blackmagic just to focus on being able to export H.264 well. Would be a good start. Next question.
Gabriel in Malaysia says, how do channels like Netflix, Amazon, and Disney handle their streams so efficiently? Video quality is great even when streaming over cellular. What's their secret sauce in compression for delivery?
So one of the big things that does make a difference when you look at that, I talked about multipass taking a long time to compress. One of the things that if you give a computer more time to do the encode, it can do a much better job. So when you're looking at a film that comes out of, number one, they're not using compressor to do this. These are huge server farms that do these compressions, and they take days. So they spend it literally, a 2.5 hour movie might take 3 or 4 days to compress for, and it's tweaked for that movie. So there's what we call golden eyes, that are people who really can see every little thing that's on there, and any of these companies have those folks, and they're looking at those things, and they're looking through those. They'll watch those movies or watch those scenes, and they'll be able to see, they'll look at those and say, well, the color was a little off, or this is a little, here, and so now at some compression rates, there's no way to fix that. But you're thinking about, when you think about something you're watching on any of these services, you're talking about days and days and days of compression for 2.5 hours, not just like a 5-hour compression or a 3-hour compression. And it's really crunching those colors and figuring out exactly the best way to represent those. And oftentimes they'll go through multiple passes to get to come out the other end. And so it's a very, very fine-tuned process to do that. That is not, it's at a whole different level than what we do here. Go ahead, Roscoe.
Yeah, if you think of keyframing in a standard editing timeline, it's basically what they're doing for compression. They're going and analyzing and have all these different attributes that they have control over the compressor at that particular moment in time. They can tweak the compressor so that that tree in the background looks as best as it possibly can. The tool set's way beyond what we're used to.
Yeah, go ahead, John, and then Nicholas.
A couple other things. They do a lot of this in hardware in the set-top boxes, and they buffer a significant amount of the show before, when you select the show, there's a ton of buffering going on to smooth that out as well. But the hardware chips, which have been around for a long time, make a huge difference, so they don't have to do that in software.
They do, but the initial creation of those that are being distributed across those are just incredibly processor intensive, because they're really analyzing those very, very carefully. And then, the cutting edge of this is a conversation that relates to resolution versus compression. So where a lot of these folks are going is talking about, well, if you go down to a lower resolution, or if you go down to a lower bandwidth, when does giving you a softer image that we scale up look better than a higher resolution image that's being heavily compressed? And right now, that's kind of the bleeding edge conversation that's going on, where they're playing around with the resolution literally scene by scene. When you go down to something when you're watching on your phone, where they might go, I'm going to give you a 640 by 360, but then zoom it up, and that will actually look better than it would if I gave you a 960 by 540 or whatever that is more compressed and at the same resolution. And so it's a lot of experimentation going on in that area. Go ahead, Nicholas, and then we're going to keep moving on after Nicholas, because we're running out of time.
Don't they use the AV1 codec, the open source Google codec that's kind of like H.265 but free license, and that's really efficient? Is that what they're all using? No, or
most of the delivery right now is still H.264, but I mean H.265 and AV1 is something that everyone's talking about. There's some stuff that's H.265 right now. There's just not a lot of platforms that support H.265. So if you look at like a Windows 10 doesn't out of the box support, and really the main delivery format right now is H.264. With H.265 coming, the AV1 is, we don't want to pay for H.265 because H.265's compression is insane. I mean, their licensing is insanely expensive, and it's not even connected to reality, and that's why people are pushing back. Apple paid into it, but they can afford to, and everyone else is kind of like, ooh, I don't think that's a good idea. Let's Mickey, like 15 seconds, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, in terms of delivery for Netflix, they ask for an IMF deliverable, which is essentially sort of a TIFF sequence wrapped up nice and tight.
Yep. Next question.
Marcus Reitalotti, I believe in Sweden, says, can you get the same quality using a software solution versus a hardware solution in terms of quality versus file size?
Go ahead, Stuart.
I think we kind of covered that with the last answer, but the simple answer is depends on how much time you have for the render. If it's something you're broadcasting live, hardware rules. If it's something that you can spend time to compress later, you can do better in software.
And oftentimes what you need is a lot of hardware with good software. So next question.
Charbox is back here in the panel. With compression, do you maximize your upload bandwidth bonding multiple internet connections using Speedify VPN or a LiveView Teradek or something like that?
Most of the stuff that we've done when it comes to bonding has been using live views. That's and a lot of the events that we have will have a live view with the extender. So that oftentimes gives us up to 14 modems that are being bonded together. I find that the telemetry data, number one, is live view handles the scaling up and down of bandwidth better than most. Telemetry data tends to be really good. There's another company, I believe, called Natural Point. I always forget. Their name is a horrible name for this, but that is better, in my opinion, better than LiveView. It's just that I can't remember the name, so I always just order a LiveView. So, Bill.
Not for live streaming, but if you're just looking for up and down, I will say that new system transfer that Frame.io has been transformative in terms of compression and uploading and downloading of just general data to your desktop.
Yeah,
they're looking at live streaming.
Real time. Yeah. Next question.
Charbox says, again, have you seen NVIDIA Maxine? Its AI compression will save 10x to 100x bandwidth and upscale the quality for stuff like Zoom.
Has anyone used that? Have you used it, Nicholas?
So I did an interview with NVIDIA. I just thought it was mind-blowingly amazing. They use AI and they kind of like take a 360p and make it looks like 1080p, like it's like really crazy a little bit what they're doing. And I thought that was like a great use of AI. Maybe all these Zoom calls, they're all going to look like 4K soon, even without the 4K webcam. Because the AI can see you move a little bit and upscale you to 4K, even if you only have a 1080p webcam.
I think that's the case. I think the hard part will be getting that to everyone, like having everybody using the NVIDIA hardware that would require that to happen. So you'd end up with that more in probably an installation environment where you're going to put them have everybody be part of that and pass it. It wouldn't be as much of a consumer solution as much as a something
solution.
That facilities, put them in to what they're doing. Go ahead, Nicholas.
I thought it was on the user, right? But actually they were explaining that the whole thing is just going to be on the cloud. So it's going to be on Zoom's cloud servers. It's going to be on AWS somewhere in the cloud. And it's going to upscale everything without changing anything in the webcams people have and everything. Huh. And all these different companies are right now talking to NVIDIA to put their huge GPUs in the cloud to try to upscale all these video calls.
It very well could happen. I think that it'll be hard to have it. I think when you look at 4K against upscaled 4K, it will look different, but it may be totally acceptable. I mean, we deal with a lot of quality issues right now, but I don't think that when the pixels aren't there, it can do a pretty good approximation. I'm not sure if it will do it as good as the real thing. Go ahead, Rusko.
It's always going to be about latency. I mean, you can do it up on the cloud, but how long is it going to take to process?
Well, and I think that's the whole NVIDIA. That's what they really do is real time or close to real time. So that's why their hardware is so valuable, is to be able to put that in. But it will be expensive. Go ahead, Stuart.
Just looking at the samples on the NVIDIA page, it kind of looks like multipass sharpening, but I kind of wonder how this is going to be linked in with deep fakes, and if we're actually looking at the way Skynet will do its interface before wiping us all out.
Yeah, go ahead, Nicholas.
Yeah, I think what's mind-blowing is you could click on a button and it can make you look 10 years younger in the Zoom call. That's going to be scary.
I want to look 10 years older because then people take me more seriously. That's the key is I want all the wrinkles and everything else. Next question.
Steve Brenneman from Indianapolis, Indiana says, what display and system spec do you have in mind for an average corporate end user that could be helpful in evaluating compression needs?
I mean, it just depends on how heavy and how often you're doing these things. And so if you are doing a lot of it, then the bigger the machine, the better, as far as making that work. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, I'm wondering if he's asking in the bit rate. And if you're using a frame like this, it's going to need to be down to 5, and the image is going to look good because there's very little gradients. There's a lot of gradients, but there's very little movement going on. There's not a lot of flowing trees or smoke that you're trying to project. So is he talking about bit rate maybe?
I'm not sure. not sure what what we're trying to solve in that. Yeah, we'll have to think that through a little bit. Next question.
I'm going to get some pronunciations here wrong. I apologize. Ronnie Hofsoy, is it, of Tromsø, Norway? What is the difference between audio hijack and loopback regarding practical use workflow wise? And if you can, examples of what, when, and why.
Let's back that one out and we'll come back to that at the very end. I think that just was a general question that snuck its way in. So we'll cancel that and move back. Next question.
Excellent. You were able to do it. It was locked out for me. Okay. Yeah. I use Handbrake for compression. Can you talk about the pros and cons of the app? This comes from Ed Rubin in Oakland, California.
It's free. I've used it for a long time. It's very flexible. It has an enormous amount of tools that are, it's basically a graphical interface for FFmpeg. So it's, that's what it is. It's just using the FFmpeg library and then doing the compression. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, depending on what you're doing, you would most likely lose any metadata in the files when you use Handbrake. So be careful.
I've heard that it's really, really popular for ripping DVDs. So I've never, of course, I've never seen that in real life. So it's you can just pop a DVD and hit go, and it just, I've heard that that's a super useful way to do that. Anyway, I can tell the story now. I'm sure is that back when Netflix, when you actually got DVDs from Netflix. I started off with Handbrake where I had a Mac Mini sitting on my desk, and I would literally they would come in, and I didn't. And it really wasn't a function of trying to keep them or whatever. It's because I would just throw them away when I was done, but I just didn't want to watch them then. What happened was I kept on having DVDs get held up in my office, and I didn't have time to watch them at that moment, but I didn't want the whole train to get caught up. So I would just Handbrake them, onto this little drive. And I had like 2 at a time, the 2 at a time membership at Netflix. And then I was like, let's do 8 at a time. So there was just this every day. And it was like this machine that it was just, while I was on meetings, I would just be constantly pushing all these into the drive. Then as I watched them, I just get rid of them all. Like I didn't need to carry, they weren't very high quality. And so I would just throw them away when I was done. But I was like, I just time shifted thousands of them. And so then at some point I then stopped for a while and then just but I had a long bus trip, and so it was one of those things that I wanted to watch them on my phone. So I watched whole TV series on my phone and everything else. So it was all just, how do I get them onto my phone, because the DVD was not like the physical thing. Now I just pay for Netflix. That was the big advantage of the membership of Netflix, is that you just have all of it and you don't have to copy anything. Anyway, next question.
Grant mic check there, Alex.
Sorry?
I said the Grant mic check story.
What was the Grant mic check story?
The mic check he does every day with the VHS. You may have a pirated copy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
I'd just like to point out that Grant's mic check is spot on perfect for what it used to be. But the funny thing was that video or that message only used to appear on the DVDs you would buy. So obviously none of the pirate ones would have it, but also the rental ones rarely had it. It would only be on the ones you bought, and you couldn't skip it. So if you bought it, you couldn't fast forward to the actual program. It had to play. It was like very annoying. People hated it with a passion.
I don't miss. I probably haven't ripped a DVD in over a decade, maybe even more than that. Like it is just completely a pain in the neck, and it was low quality. Roscoe.
I will point out to all you criminals that Congress exempted film professors from the DMCA. Thank you.
And I taught, so I'm going to call it. I was teaching because there we go. The next question.
Alex 40 Golden, who brands himself now as London, Europe. That's interesting. If Zoom is all about 25 frames per second, the same data rate would look better than at 2997 frames per second. When does 25 frames per second work better, including filming at 25 or 50 to go to 25 for online events?
Well, the only thing to remember is that Facebook and YouTube run at 30 frames a second. So if you give it 25, they still stream at 30. So now if you're streaming into them, they stream 30, whether you send them 25 or 24 or 6, you can get 60 and you can set them to 60 for gaming and stuff like that. I think 25 does get you more spatial quality, because you're just using a fifth less or a sixth less of data. So it actually is advantageous in that case. But temporal quality, so if you have motion graphics, 25 is a little bit of a bummer. And I think that over time we're going to actually go the other direction. So I think that you're starting to see just the iPads are at 120. You're starting to see a lot more things are shooting at 120. And the reason 120 is so interesting is because it's evenly divisible by 60, 30, and 24. So if then you get into a different thing, which we won't talk about here, which is an interpolation of motion blur. So if you go back from 120 to 24, you have a bunch of frames in between, and you can calculate the pixel velocities and build the motion blur back in relatively effectively. And so I think that, and you can do that in hardware. So there's a bunch of advantages to that I think we're going to see in the not too distant future. Next question.
Charbax is back with compression. Netflix, Prime, YouTube, they all use the free open source Google AV1 codec, right? So how soon will AV2 be ready?
I think it's a moniker. I don't think it's a version. I think AV1 is the overall what they're calling it. I don't think that it's a version. I don't think it's going to be AV2. I think it's going to be AV. Maybe eventually, maybe AV2, but I have no idea. It's still going to be a fight over. The problem is H.265 is still more efficient, and they're already working on H.266. So and so those are, and the problem is they cost money, which is everyone's trying to avoid. But if they could figure out if the MPEG consortium could figure out how to actually charge in a reasonable way, we probably wouldn't be having any of these conversations. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good way to put this, because it's been frustrating to live through this over the last 25 years. There's some 265 is super technical, requires a ton of CPU, and you have to support the ecosystem. So you've got, AV1, were all the browsers supported out of the box? No, they probably won't. Which players will support it, and when does it move from software into hardware? So there's ecosystem considerations with these codecs that take a long time. 265's been around for almost 10 years now, and AV1's been around for, I don't know, 5 years or something. So it's more about the ecosystem than technology.
Right. I will say that 265 is a pretty beautiful thing when you're using it, because it's so efficient, but really, if you're not using an Apple device, it's pretty hard. Bill.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It has astonished me, the lack of uptake, because it does have really good quality. So when I use it, I'm really happy with it, but it's nowhere out there. And I think that's just how business and marketing and intellectual property gets in the way of advancement of the industry. It's always been there, probably always will be there.
Go ahead, Nicholas.
The new Sony A7S III is shooting amazing H.265 that you can edit on the M1 Max, and it's so smooth. It's amazing that, like with all these Intel machines until now, you could barely scroll around the video. It would be impossible to work with. But now, if you got the M1 chip, the ARM-powered laptop, it works.
The funniest one that I got caught up in was that when Blackmagic first put out their 32 SD card recorders, they went hog wild this is 5 years ago. They went hog wild and just released them as H.265, figuring that they're going to be ahead, and you couldn't open it. It just sat there on a shelf until no one could open the files. And you're trying to deliver these to press, because we use those 32s to deliver programs out to the press, and it was just a disaster. Anyway, so it was they finally put an H.264 compressor on it, but yeah, it is beautiful when it's supported. Next question, last question, I think.
Charbax, we actually have two more. This one and another one. Oh no, I just read that it wasn't marked. I'm sorry. So we do have one more. You were right. Ronnie Hofsoy of Tromsø, Norway, once again says, "What is the difference between audio hijack and loopback regarding practical use, workflow wise? Examples of what, why, and when?"
Yeah, go ahead. I was just waiting for Mickey. I didn't want to put the pressure on him.
Loopback is for routing between apps and different interfaces, be it virtual or actual physical audio interfaces. And audio hijack is for when you need to do some processing on the audio.
Yeah. Perfect. All right.
Buy both, right? That's the key there.
Always buy them both.
Yeah.
Like you just need them both. Like I bought them separately. It was a bummer because I was just like,
So did I.
really? Did I have to do that? The $30 I'll never get back. Anyway, so but you just buy them both. They're great. Oh, and by the way, Mickey, I need that filter set for audio hijack for what I'm doing. Not today, but I got to figure that out. I'm going to work on it this afternoon because there's no audio coming out right now of the test stream because I realized that I have the PIX is set to input analog and it's going HDMI and I have to go to the office to actually get that set up. So anyway, so it's going out of I kept on trying to figure out why is it going out of the computer and not ending up on YouTube, but that's why. But we'll I actually feel like I'm looking at it right now. The problem we need, just as a little note, problem we need to do is I got to put a scaler in there somewhere so that I can scale the graphics of the viewer out of the screen. So I just got to bump it up a little bit. Because right now, if you look at the test stream, you can see recording and other things up in the top. And so I have to get rid of those. But once we get that out of the way, I think that along with your Magic connected to it, it'll be 1080p with Mickey Magic, compressing that down. And I think they'll end up with a really nice output to YouTube. It gets better. I think if folks look at, I put it in earlier in Mukana. If you look at the test stream versus what we did here, I think that the test stream is looking better. I think the color looks better. And obviously the resolution looks better. So I think we're close. All right, everybody. Great morning once again, as expected at this point. It's not expected though. I always get in every morning. I'm like, oh, this is going to be the day. It didn't really turn out. It never is. It never is. It's like 330 something or other. And they're just good days every day. All right.
Hey, are we clubhousing tonight?
We are clubhousing tonight. So clubhouse 7:00. I'll probably open it up at 6:45 and we can kind of figure it out. I still haven't figured out how to do the private first thing and without just going public. And
I'm waiting for you to get to spin up 10 Clubhouse instances that we can log into on our regular system and just be in Clubhouse because you're handling it.
I have to figure out, I do have to figure out the club thing. So I'm going to do a little research on the club thing because I have the club, but I don't understand who goes into it, who follows it and how it works. And we might even talk about that on Clubhouse tonight because I don't fully understand that. So anyway, we'll figure it out. All right. Thanks everybody. We're going to jump into the post show. See you tomorrow.